Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm Stephanie James, your host. I'm the founder of stelliumastrology.com, and today I have a special guest with me for this enhanced podcast edition. I have Anne Whitaker, who is a very experienced astrologer and has written a number of columns. You've written in all sorts of places, haven't you, Anne?
Yes, I've had a column in the Astrological Association Journal since 2015, since the new editor, Victor Oliver, messaged me. And he let me know that he was going to put in an astrology column. He was going to modernize the whole thing. And I said, well, in the interest of balance, you should have a not the astrology column as well. So Victor being Victor, he said, okay, then you write it. So I have had a not the astrology column in the AA Journal since 2015, and it's been great fun working with Victor. He's just he's a good laugh. He's outrageous, but he really knows what he's doing. And I was very, very lucky to have him edit my new book, Postcards to the Future, and to have Roz Saunders design it and Kat Keane do the cover. I had a really good team. And I'm really happy with the book. It's been wonderfully reviewed. Yeah. And
so this is the book.
There it is, folks. There it is.
I've been sent a copy. I feel so lucky. I've been sent a copy.
It's my pleasure. And you were asking about columns. My other favorite column was in the USA for wonderful editor Ronnie Grishman, who edited Dell Horoscope magazine for a very, very long time. And I think it was about 40 years. And the magazine sadly shut down a couple of years ago, more or less on its Uranus return.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Gosh. And what prompted that? What actually prompted?
Well, I don't know about the politics or the mechanics of it, but I think basically print has been a casualty of the digital revolution. And I think that's really been the core of why that happened. But it's been much mourned across the world. And my column was called The Astro View from Scotland.
I like it.
I'm going to become solemn and put my spectacles on. There we are.
You're ready.
I am ready, and your listeners have no idea the trouble we've had getting onto this, because Mercury, our friend Mercury, is going retrograde on Saturday at 9 degrees Libra, which is precisely my Neptune degree in my natal horoscope. So it's actually a miracle that we got here. I don't know how Mercury Retro has been affecting your horoscope, Stephanie, but it's certainly been having a good go at mine.
It's in Libra, isn't it? So it's trine all my Aquarius stellium, and it's what else is it doing? I think probably squaring. I don't think it's gone far enough to cause me any problems, really. Actually,
well, if it's making a nice trine to all your Aquarius stuff, it'll probably let you off fairly lightly. I mean, I'm actually very fond of Mercury retrograde. Mercury is my ruling planet, and the subtitle of the book is called Mercurial Musings, 1995 to 2021. So I've had a long and interesting relationship with Mercury retrograde. But I think, that the old saw prevails, which is that it's a very good time for going back over things and redoing, etc., etc., etc. I think people are unnecessarily negative about Mercury retrograde's influence.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's really got a bit of a bad reputation, but actually, even just recently, as Mercury retrograde approaches, I've noticed myself looking back over my website and thinking, I've got to change that and I've got to change this. And it's like, I've explained it to my listeners as a type of resynchronizing, a bit like when you put the telly on and the sound and the speech, like the speech and the picture are just slightly out of sync. Yep. Sometimes Mercury retrograde is about rebooting and just getting it to resynchronize. It's a period of just bringing it back together again, and it's a great time to sort out little errors you've found. I mean, sometimes it can be big mistakes that you've found that really need to be rectified, and you find yourself going back over and redoing a lot of work. But sometimes it's about tidying up and doing a bit of housework, so to speak, and just making sure everything's. Go ahead.
You are absolutely spot on, because I use Mercury retrograde times to drag myself by the ear to my admin and do tax stuff and admin stuff, which I absolutely hate. I mean, I'm good at it because I've got a Virgo rising and Mercury ruler, but I hate doing it. So when Mercury retrograde comes along, I literally get myself by the ear and drag myself to my admin desk and just do stuff.
Yeah, it's got to be done, unfortunately, these
Yeah.
little arduous tasks in life that we could just quite easily ignore, but Mercury actually makes it possible for us to get on top of them.
That's right. And when I was running a busy astrology practice in the 80s and 90s particularly, I used to look at Mercury retrograde periods coming up and think, oh God, I'll get a rest, because clients cancel or postpone. There was one famous occasion where a client phoned up to say, I'm terribly sorry, I can't come to my appointment because my house is on fire. Fortunately, the fire brigade had just arrived and it was all right. It was very minor, but that was it. And then I was teaching a lot of classes at the time, and I used to have fun. I mean, you have to have fun when you're teaching astrology. You really do. There are times to be very serious, and there's times to have a good laugh. So what I used to do was go around a group of about a dozen students, have a look at their charts just before Mercury went retrograde, and give them a quick, I mean, I am very cautious about prediction, I should say, because it's, anyway, that's a big topic we could talk at least an hour about. But I used to give them a light-hearted prediction, and one guy who was a lawyer, I looked at his chart and I said, it looks as though a woman close to you is going to be having some kind of communication problems over the next few weeks. And his feedback, I got their feedback after the Mercury retrograde was over, and his feedback was that his secretary sprained her wrist on the first day of Mercury retrograde and couldn't do any typing for him for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So
that's interesting.
Quite an interesting real world example of
Mercury
retrograde.
Yeah, it happens a lot. And like I was saying, I was just looking over so many things. I've got all these little jobs that I've got to go back. I'm planning to go back over every podcast episode and literally only go into the bio text bit anyway, and just add a different link rather than millions of links, because I've like streamlined the processes a bit. So it's like going back, having improved things, but I have to go back and sort all of that out. So that might be my trine. It's like it's not impacting me into a disruptive way, and it's making it easier for me to communicate with people in a more productive way rather than confusing them with millions of links.
That's a very good use of it.
Yes, exactly. And I've also got Mercury is my chart ruler as well. So I have got Gemini rising. So it's a nice little connection we've got there. And so I do find some people that have Mercury as their ruling planet do actually say Mercury retrograde works for me, like you've just said. But what I really like about your book, actually, for somebody who has got Mercury as their chart ruler, Gemini rising, is it's little snippets, really. It's like all of it, like the articles that you've written, little tidbits that you can dip in and out as and when you feel like it. You don't have to commit to reading a heavy body of text, which takes a lot of time and energy sometimes, because you have to think a lot about it and put it down and mull it over. You can literally pick it up and just say, I fancy having a little read today. And I found actually when I received the book, I ended up reading about, quite a big chunk of it, because it was so easy to digest. I actually yes, it was lovely and really enjoyable, because your writing style is just so fluid. I think it really I find it very easy to follow and enjoyable, like entertaining. It inspires imagery. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I have to say, I am a bit of a fan of yours as well. So the fact that you got in touch with me, I've spoken about you on the podcast before. My listeners will remember me referring to your work. And I can't remember which episode it was that I was talking about. I do remember reading some of your work. I downloaded did you write a Jupiter Uranus
yes,
download?
my famous Jupiter Uranus, from erotic bathing to stargazing. Except the American Federation of Astrologers weren't too keen on that, so they just called it Jupiter meets Uranus.
That's a shame.
But I thought if I'd got this subtitle, from erotic bathing to stargazing, then it would get picked up by all kinds of porn sites who would be terribly, terribly disappointed when they got to the actual meat of it.
That was a very good idea, but it got poo-pooed.
Yeah, it did, sadly, because it was a research study. In fact, some of it went back over Jupiter, Uranus, right through 2,500 years of history in 500-year blocks, so that I could see the pattern of movement of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions throughout time. And what was really, because Jupiter conjunct Uranus is very much about opening up to new possibilities. I mean, Dolly the sheep was announced to the world under a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the first men who stood on the moon, hopefully the next one, it'll be the first women who stand on the moon, but the first men who stood on the moon stood on it when there was an exact Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Libra in 1969. So it's stuff like that. But what I discovered was that this Jupiter-Uranus combination occurred more frequently in the period of time from 1500 to 2000 I think it was in Aquarius. It occurred more frequently during that period than in any other period of history. And that has undoubtedly been the most developmental opening out to new possibilities period that we've ever had. So I then got re-obsessed with it, because the conjunction is every 14 years. I was obsessed with the 1997 combination. And one of the bits of fun feedback I had, because I had 17 researchees, half of them didn't know any astrology, but they all had 5 degrees of Aquarius as a significator in their horoscopes, and that's where the conjunction met. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun to put together a bunch of people, all of whom have that signature, although they have very different charts, and see if I can find an underlying common factor which connects to the meaning of these two planets coming together, which I did, to my great surprise, because I'm actually quite skeptical. It was Ernest Hemingway, I think, who said, all writers need a built-in shockproof crap detector. And my crap detector sits there permanently. And I subject my own musings to crap detection as well. So I was really quite astonished that all these diverse people had the same essential zip in their lives during the period of time of this conjunction, where things happened of a very unusual left field nature, sometimes quite disruptive and troublesome. But every single person opened out to new possibilities of one kind or another. And the erotic bathing bit came when this couple decided that they would have a double-headed bath with gold taps on each end installed in their new house. And they took their first bath together at opposite ends of this bath on the day of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, 1997. That was how
lavish.
I know, it was wonderful. So I couldn't resist putting that into the title.
No.
So I then did another research study of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Pisces and Aries in 2010, 2011, which is, I never bothered putting it into a book, but all the research is on a website, a blog that I set up called Jupiter Meets Uranus. And then the next one comes up in 2024. And I'm thinking, well, if I live long enough, maybe I'll get re-obsessed with the next one and write something about that as well. So who knows?
Yeah, I'm excited about that one, actually.
Are you? Aha.
Yes.
I will put you down as it. Well, I can't remember, unfortunately, offhand where the conjunction falls.
But I actually happen to have a book with me that I can look it up very quickly.
Okay.
Let's have a quick look.
I think
Uranus.
It's 2024. I think it's 23 Taurus. I'm not sure, but I think it might be.
Where are we? 2020.
I think it's 2024. Is it
2024. 21st of April 2024 at 21:50 Taurus. Now I remember why it sticks out in my mind. It's going to be on my Chiron. Ouch. But yes, that will be fun. It will be square my Mars as well. But I actually have a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction natally as well in Sagittarius. So and
you
my
were born under that one. Oh, I love that one.
So do I.
Yeah, that's a great Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Well, I'm telling you what, Steph, we are recording this, so there is no escape. If I'm still around in 2024 and I've got re-obsessed, I will be knocking on your door.
Please do. You'd be welcome. My mum also has a Jupiter-Uranus in Cancer in her first house. So I can pick her brains as well for you.
Yes, but the people I'll be after for the research study are people who have got something in their horoscope at about between 21 and 23 Taurus.
Well, I will have to see if I can find anybody for you as well.
Wow.
Plenty of people of my generation have got a very similar Chiron placement.
Yeah.
So
yeah, gosh, that would be, we're talking ourselves into a joint project here. So.
I think I'd be completely and utterly up for that, actually.
Great.
Because
okay then.
yeah, we have to do it, don't we? We have to.
I'm very busy being a useful elder. I've decided my role in my community is to be a useful elder in various ways. So I'm going to use my useful elderdom, if I'm still around in 2024, to write another research study. So there you go.
That's a great idea. That is. And having already got I've got the printout, I've got the download, I got it when it was free. I count my lucky stars for that, because unfortunately it's such a shame, isn't it, that there's so much plagiarism on the internet these days.
Well, I mean, I got so pissed off because I did a research study called The Moon's Nodes in Action, which was, again, original research. I must have been mad.
I think I have that one as well.
You maybe do. I think Victor and I are thinking of producing that one as a print book, but I think I'm going to be putting it together, an updated version of it as a Kindle book, because I've got some new research.
It's a good idea.
But I mean, I gave away, I think it was something like 5,000 people downloaded that. And then I discovered that somebody was selling it on their website. This happens to people all the time now. So I threatened them with, I pulled out my Saturn-Pluto conjunction, square Jupiter and Scorpio, and came down on them like a ton of bricks, and threatened them with all kinds of legal action and everything. So they stopped it. But from then on, I put a $10 fee onto it and set it up so that nobody could download it without paying me.
That's fair.
To them.
That's very fair.
Sad when one is doing something for the community, and that's the way it's abused. But that's the world we live in.
Unfortunately,
because, you know, one of my I suppose one of my major life themes goes back to what Jung said about our task in life. And his view was that our central task in life is to create a unity of opposites within ourselves and within what we put out into the world. So we have to accept, I think there's a Chinese proverb which goes, we have to work with that which is spoiled. And although on the face of it, that sounds quite grim and quite sad, it's also very optimistic, because what it's saying is we do not live in a perfect world. Shadow and light coexist and always have since the beginning of time. And we need to work a way of managing that combination constructively rather than destructively. And the most destructive way people deal with that combination is by identifying with the light in themselves and projecting the shadow onto other people. And that happens both individually and collectively. I mean, I'm thinking back to when Ronald Reagan was president of the United States, and he famously called the USSR the evil empire. And I really think that, you know, one looks at one's own evil and deals with that before calling out anybody else's.
Yes.
So, yeah, you know, I'm a great believer in working with the shadow, and that's been a big issue for me personally, because I have a lot of darkness in my own chart. Fortunately for me, all the Saturn-Pluto stuff has got nice sextiles to Neptune, so I'm not nearly as tough as I could be, but I can pull that bit of myself out when I need to. So I think, you know, one of the great gifts of astrology is showing us who we actually are. But what a good astrologer can do is, I mean, I'm a great fan of Stephen Forrest, and incidentally, at more or less the same time as my essay collection came out, he produced an essay collection called The Endless Sky, which is very similar in the way he's laid it out to mine. There's an introduction and there's different topics, and he ranges over a whole spectrum. And he and I actually got talking about this, and I wrote a long review of his book, and he very generously immediately followed it with a lovely review of my own, and a photo of him standing on the roof of his house in New Mexico, waving a copy of my book. So he's a very, very generous person. Yeah. But I love his book of essays because it really covers the spectrum. So I would recommend that one to yourself and to anyone
Okay.
else who is.
Well, on this podcast, we love book recommendations.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yes,
Maybe
definitely. And
you could maybe even have you interviewed Stephen Forrest on the podcast?
I haven't. No. I think he commented. I think we're Facebook acquaintances.
Yeah.
And when I got my Elle magazine job that I wrote for Elle for a little while, he commented underneath and said, you know, he'd done something similar, or I think he'd written for Elle himself or something. So I was like, oh, that's so exciting. But yes, as far as actually connecting with him and inviting him for a podcast, I haven't done that. And I know he's an extremely busy man. So yes, I do. I follow I've got his newsletter and things like that, because I'm a bit of a,
it's really good.
yes, I follow a lot of astrologers' newsletters. I love it. I love like just all of the insight that you get, you know, and it just pops into your inbox. I don't even have to go looking for it. It just finds me.
You have a Gemini ascendant by any chance?
Oh yes. I love it. You should see my inbox. It's just chaos, but it's full of really interesting stuff.
Yeah. The reason that I mentioned Stephen Forrest is because he has a really interesting way and a very constructive way of talking about darkness in the horoscope. And he says, you know, you can look at, there's no such thing as a bad chart, is his attitude. Everyone has the chart that they need to have in this particular lifetime. But what he says is, you know, you can look at a pattern like Saturn, Pluto, for example, and he said you can either go high with it or you can go low with it. And, you know, our job is to help people to express the highest level.
Yeah.
It's
really, it's about the frequency, the vibration. It's just, you can just stop at the first cafe or the first shop you find. You can stop at the first shop and buy the first item, or you can shop around a bit and get the best deal.
Well, exactly. And I mean, you can look at the different branches coming out of something. I mean, I recall a male client a number of years ago, a man in his 40s coming for a reading, and he had a Saturn Neptune square, which was being triggered by the progressed sun. Now, you can look at the minus side of that. I mean, what he really came to talk about was the fact that he had grown up in an alcoholic household with an alcoholic father, and he was afraid of his own tendencies in that direction and wanted to get some perspective on it. But so that was one branch which I could, you know, talk to him about and help him with. But another branch of that particular combination, which I would never have thought of, came when I asked him what he did for a living. And he said, oh, I make musical instruments, which is a wonderful combination of the form of Saturn and the content of musicality.
Yes.
So that's a very good example of how an energy can go high or it can go low.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that by coming to address his own fears about addiction, he was opening that up to discussion and awareness.
I feel like he was literally the physical embodiment of the square aspect, to be aware of it in that way.
Yes, I know. So it's funny how, I don't know if you're like that, but I've done so many charts over the years, but some things really stick in your mind, and that was one of them. And I've always taken the view that, you know, one should be honest with one's clients as far as one can be, but really, really not say, oh, that's a really, you know, I think to dismiss aspects as bad aspects is not a good way of doing astrology.
Oh, it drives me bonkers.
Describe the essence of a pattern to somebody. I mean, I was really, really quite tough on my students when I was teaching. Well, I still do some teaching. But I used to say to them, look, you've got to it's no good saying Uranus sun is about change. What kind of change?
Yes.
You've got to really try and define the essence of something. And once you've captured the essence, then you can look at all the different branches that grow from that essence. And the thing about each planetary symbol is it's an archetype. So there's an inexhaustible range of branches, but they all come back to the same core.
Yes, I've got a quote from your book, actually. I think it says, the planets showing in the horoscope's archetypal patterns are ours for life. So we are an expression, we are a unique expression, which we will continually, you know, channel throughout our life experience.
Yeah. And we try and work out ways, once we understand ourselves, of the best way to channel that energy. mean, the late Charles
Yes.
Harvey, I don't know if your generation knows Charles Harvey's work.
I know him, but I never had the luxury or the pleasure of being able to learn from him.
Was a big mentor for me during the 1980s and the 1990s, as he was for so many people. He was such an enthusiastic, supportive astrologer, but he also had a big mind. And his main thing was mundane astrology and the astrology of the collective.
Yes.
But he was one of my teachers. I studied with Liz Green and Charles Harvey at the Centre for Psychological Astrology during the 1990s. And Charles used to wind me up because there is this book which some of you may have come across. It's called The Combination of Stellar Influences by Reinhold Eberton. And it's one of the older generation of astrologers. I think it was in the 1940s. And Eberton, you've got to be feeling strong before you dip into combination of stellar influences. It's fondly called COSI, C-O-S-I. So it's worth getting a copy of it. If you can.
The name rings a bell. It's so strong for me, but then I always worked on the bookstores, so I may have just seen it there.
Yes,
I have a feeling I own this book somewhere.
Go and have a look at it. But the point about COSI is that he worked out the combination of stellar influences. I'm doing this very simplistically, but he had the plus end, the neutral middle, and the minus end. And every so often, Charles would come up to me at break time and say, "Right, Anne, what is it this week? Is it deeply searching scientist or is it mass murderer?"
Wow.
That was COSI's basic summary of Saturn conjunct Pluto. On the one hand,
I have to say, I am also a Saturn-Pluto native, so that applies to me too.
They are. But I mean, it was really funny. I mean, Eberton would have a terribly hard time in our much gentler world today in some ways, where people are can have trigger warning. It should probably have a trigger warning attached to it.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
But one end of that continuum apparently is mass murder, and the other end of the continuum is deeply searching scientist. So I was quite relieved to know that I was embarked on not just one but two research studies at the time when Charles was me about that.
A big relief, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I'm also a bit of a researcher, so that really resonates with me actually.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I haven't murdered anybody, so.
No, well, the thing is that you have to look at the whole horoscope, obviously.
Yeah.
Minus has got a nice big fat square to Jupiter in the third house, so it brings me a very dark sense of humor. But that has been my saving grace on a number of occasions in my life. But so it's, again, that's an example of, a combination of planets that has a very dark press. But you really can, if you understand what's in it, you can really face your own power drives, your own power issues, your own difficult parts. And if you can do that, then you can exercise some kind of moral restraint over the worst aspects of it, because it can be quite bullying, Saturn, Pluto. And if you can own up to these parts of yourself, then you can deal with them, and then you can hopefully cultivate the better dimensions. Because I have a Mercury, Saturn, Pluto lineup, and there's nothing I like better than doing research.
Yeah. We've got a lot in common, astrologically speaking.
Yeah.
What you're saying to me, I remember quite earlier on in your book, you talked about having all of the transpersonal planets crossing your IC at some point.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, of course, you're going to be a deeply searching researcher when you've had that kind of insight affect you on such a core level.
Well, the thing is that I have either 5 or 6 planets in the 12th house, depending on what house system you use. Square Jupiter, fortunately, otherwise I'd never come out. You'd never see me. I'd never appear. My very, very first astrology class, which I went to about 1983, I think it was, the teacher did all of her horoscopes. And she looked at mine and she said, "How come you're here? You should be able to look for the chart like that." And I said to her, "Have you not looked at the Jupiter square that squares the whole lot to the third house?" Because I was beginning to pick up the terminology by then. So I have a very reclusive side. I mean, one of my big problems in being a writer and being a public person is that although I've done quite a lot of public stuff in the 80s and 90s, as I've got older, I've got more anxious about putting my head above the parapet, which is why I've done so much writing, because I'm quite happy to send my postcards out from behind the sofa. But I'm probably happier in there, so I don't do as much PR and things like that as I should for my books. But it's because I have that struggle between all that fiery exhibitionist Leo stuff and the 12th house, which tells you that we live in such a vast universe that none of your ego stuff matters one tiny bit.
How humbling.
And but fire always comes up and says, it doesn't matter one tiny bit unless you do something constructive with your tiny bit. And that's kind of where I'm at with my own life, I think.
Yeah, well, I think you've been incredibly constructive.
Wow.
The fact that you want to be a helpful elder to start with is a good place to start.
Capital E.
Also with all the little, the little bits in your book that just reading through them, there were so many little bits that I related to, and you were talking about Pluto. I don't know if it was like the imagery of Pluto. Now I'm going to struggle to find the bit that I was looking for, but I was just, you were talking about it and I was just reading it and relating. Of Scorpio moon, 8th house sun.
Gosh, we do have a lot in common, Steffi.
Yeah, so there's a lot, and you talking about the struggle between public and private, I have an Aquarius stellium, but that Scorpio moon also sort of squares that, and I struggle myself with, particularly without digressing too much, one of my ex-boyfriends, I had no idea was keeping a very close eye on me on social media, and if I ever stepped out of line, he'd zip in quickly and go, I'm watching, I'm listening, and so it frightened me, and I kept myself very private for a long time. So actually putting my face in the public space is a big deal for me. It took a lot of courage. But yeah, otherwise, if it weren't for doing astrology, I'd be pretty much hiding away doing my Scorpio moon thing, I think.
Well, do you know what, Steffi? You can come up and sit behind my sofa and have a cup of tea in that little space anytime you like.
Oh, that sounds absolutely the most lovely, tempting offer. I'd absolutely love it. Because I think we'd have no end of subjects to discuss, would we?
Yeah, oh, I know, absolutely, all sorts. Shall I read a little bit? Shall I read a
I was just looking, I was just going to say, you've written 6 things I love about astrology.
Yeah.
Is that where you were going to go?
Yeah, funnily enough, that's very prescient of you. And
why not? Let's do it.
Maybe I should flash my horoscope, since I am a Leo after all.
Oh, please do.
That is quite a recognizable horoscope. There's no point in me even bothering to pretend it's not me, because it's so recognizable. So you see, you do get flashes of the Leo show-off come out. I mean, you can't totally suppress the Leo show-off, even with all that 12th house. So, but we need a bit of that. And I do empathize with you about your hesitancy about, public exposure, because, we come out and we radiate confidence and all the rest of it, but people just sometimes don't understand what lies behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a Saturn Pluto squaring my chart ruler and my Venus is very much somebody that would probably rather hide from the the nasties rather than put themselves right in public view. But you just got to do these things, haven't you? You can't hide forever. Well,
that's right. And also that energy is very tough, but there are times when you need to pull it out and use it for yourself. I mean, I don't use that energy of mine unless somebody is really offensive or rude or unfair or whatever. But I have pulled it out on occasion, and I can assure you there has not been much left standing of that person by the time I'm just talking words here. I'm not talking anything else. So, there are times when we have to be tough, and times when we really need to be tender and compassionate. And I think the unfolding path of your life and the gathering of wisdom is about being able to subtly differentiate across the spectrum of who you are regarding what sort of behavior you need to produce in a given situation, and what's acceptable and what's not.
A lifelong work, that is. I think
we're all a work in progress. I mean, it's what I find quite remarkable is that some of the characters in our stage remain young and vulnerable throughout our entire lives. And it's up to us, rather than punishing these parts of ourselves, to protect them and nurture them.
Absolutely. And not perhaps in the wrong situation, put an S at the beginning of the word and end up with a sword in your hand rather than kindness.
Yes, exactly. Right. Well, shall I read this?
Absolutely.
You have a wee break while I read this. Okay.
Go for it.
6 things I love about astrology. And this is the preface to my 60 essays. And the range is really very broad, as Steffi has kindly brought out. But here are 6 things. And I wrote this for World Astrology Day some years ago. And it starts with one of my favorite quotations. 6,000 years ago, when the human mind was still half asleep, Chaldean priests were standing on their watchtowers, scanning the stars. And that's from the book The Sleepwalkers by Arthur Koestler. So here's the first thing I love about astrology. I love knowing that the rational, mythical, symbolic, and empirical art of astrology has been around for at least 6,000 years. Our increasing contemporary awareness of the interconnectedness of all things was well known in antiquity. The ancient maxim, as above, so below, still applies. Astrologers operate on the margins of our fragmenting reductionist culture. But we represent an unbroken line to a time which in many ways was wiser than ours is now. Being a tiny thread in that weave gives me a deep sense of pride, connectedness, and rootedness. 2, I love being able to look out at the night sky, seeing the beauty of the lunar cycle and the visible planets in their ever-changing, ever-repeating patterns, knowing that being an astrologer offers one the privilege of perceiving not only astronomy, but also symbolic meaning out there. I can still recall the exhilaration I felt on a freezing cold, clear night in January 1986 on a visit to the Outer Hebrides. My brother, a merchant Navy captain, was able to point out Saturn to me, the first time I had ever seen that venerable planet with the naked eye. Saturn's meaning was also present that night. We were on our way back from the wake for an old uncle who had just died. 3, I love the fact that I started out as a dismisser of our ancient art and ended up its devoted practitioner, having set out to confront my embarrassment at the inexplicable fascination I had developed for a subject which I considered to be beneath my intellectual consideration. This is the typical position of ignorance combined with arrogance from which many people dismiss astrology, not realizing that there is a subject of great depth and power beyond the sun signs of astrology's public face. I embarked on a course of study with the Faculty of Astrological Studies in the early 1980s to prove to myself through study rather than ignorant dismissal that there was nothing in astrology, and I've kept up an unbroken interest since then for over 40 years. So I really got mine on that one. 4, I love how literal astrology can be. Saturn met Neptune in November 1989, and the Berlin Wall came down. There was a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Libra in July 1969, when a huge cooperative effort of unique scientific endeavor put the first human on the moon. On the day Pluto first went into Sagittarius in January 1995, there was a massive earthquake in Japan, and the city of Kobe went up in flames. At that same time, John Paul II, the best traveled Pope ever, preached to an open-air audience of over 1 million people in Manila, in the Philippines. To lower the tone somewhat, I was having lunch with a bank manager friend of mine on the day Saturn turned retrograde on my Scorpio IC on the 7th of March, 1985. For no apparent reason, brackets, being sober at the time, end of brackets, I passed out, just as another bank manager and friend of my friend was passing the restaurant window. They both ended up carting me home between them. 4, I love the impossibility of ever getting on top of or to the end of one's astrological studies. I have never applied myself to, e.g., Chinese or Hindu astrology, not yet feeling I have enough of a grasp of the Western tradition into which I was born. And you can do hundreds or thousands of horoscope readings, teach hundreds of classes with thousands of students, and someone will still come up with a manifestation of, for example, Venus combined with Saturn or Mercury combined with Neptune, which you have never before come across or thought of. And finally, 6, I love astrology for the help it has given me and countless other people who are willing to look within and try to be honest about themselves in understanding the quirks and complexities, the gifts and pains of my personality and life pattern. My studies began as the next step in a lifelong quest to prove that our existence has some meaning, that we are not just butterflies randomly pinned to the board of fate, that we are each here because we have something unique to contribute to the big picture. Astrology has provided me with that proof. For that, and to that unbroken line of students and practitioners of our great art, stretching right back to those ancient Chaldeans on their watchtowers, I will be forever grateful. Thank you. So
that, I think, was the article that really hooked me into your book.
Really? Was it really?
Yes, because fortunately it's quite early on, and you know, it's so many of those. As an astrologer, even if I was just starting out in my studies, a lot of it just resonates, you know, especially for me, the kind of not really believing it, but feeling like it's just wanting to dig deeper to find more, isn't it? And just to get to the bottom of it. I was always quite skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a Capricorn, you know, I have that element of needing to do something that feels a bit more respectable and believable at the very least.
And also you've got the built-in shockproof crap detector on the shoulder. We all need in the flaky world of mysticism and astrology and all
yes.
that.
And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, I remember when I started out thinking at some point, something's not going to be, you know, it's not going to come together. And I'm just going to find this to be, you know, just some kind of weird, like, belief system that doesn't actually work or something. So I always went into astrology with an element of at least having one foot on the ground and while I've got the other in the sort of spiritual realm, thinking, you know, I'm quite prepared to be proved wrong or proved right if this is, you know.
Well, that's a good attitude.
Yes, it's one that I always try and adopt, to be honest with you, because I think that no one can ever really know the truth of, you know, it's one of those things that we have to constantly question and search for answers, basically. You know, the big one for me is, you know, about who's right as far as religion's concerned. I've got Jupiter and Uranus and Neptune all in Sagittarius.
Wow.
And I have to I'm very, very open-minded, and I believe that perhaps we're all right, actually. You know, as long as I've said it on the podcast before, as long as your beliefs aren't hurting somebody, as long as what you're practicing is, you know, truly beneficial to you and is not inflicting any kind of pain or suffering on somebody else, then what harm is it, actually? And you know, I'm open-minded and I'm interested in various thoughts and various belief systems and realities and perspectives. It's just, I don't know, the curiosity of my Gemini ascendant, perhaps.
Well, do you know what, Stephanie? You have actually spoken my script. Because from the time I opened my eyes to, I mean, I have Jupiter square everything and Pluto conjunct everything just about. And from the moment I opened my eyes to the world, I started wondering why we were here. And I'm still doing it. And everything you have said, I would absolutely endorse. And, you know, we live in mystery. We live in mystery, and all honest investigations which help us to shed a bit of light on mystery through whatever lens we look, whether it's scientific or religious or whatever, needs to be respected and appreciated. And you've probably been looking, as most of us have, at these incredible images coming from the James Webb Telescope. And, you know,
Yeah.
we knew before that we lived in a vast universe, but these have revealed a quantum level of vastness. And
Yes.
I sit and look at these and I try and get my limited human mind round. And I cannot, because it's too big for us. And then I think about the people who arrogantly dismiss our great subject without actually taking the trouble to study and investigate it.
Yeah.
And it's very hard not to spend your whole life as a serious astrologer being angry with that. You can't be, you have to come to terms with it. And there's a chapter in here which is about, I think it's a pretty graceful but hard-hitting piece about the dismissers and how to deal with the dismissers. But we live in a vast, amazing universe. And one of the things I'm writing about just now is why this particular Saturn-Uranus square that's been around for the last while seems to have been instrumental in producing, well, no, the symbols don't produce anything. They reflect the energy patterns of the universe at the moment we're living through. But there seems to be a particularly divisive anger around in the world just now. I mean, planet's in a terrible state. And instead of us pulling together to do something about that, we're all fighting with one another at all kinds of different levels. So this kind of brings me back to Jung, who basically pointed out that if there's something wrong with the world, there's something wrong with society. If there's something wrong with society, there's something wrong with my nation. If there's something wrong with my nation, there's something wrong with my family. If there's something wrong with my family, there's something wrong with me. And if there's something wrong with me, I need to start with me in sorting out the balance of the energies that I came into this world with. And I have a wonderful friend called Emily Cutts, who is a community activist like no other, who has set up an amazing project called G20 Works, which is all about, it's an all-embracing organization, which basically supports, facilitates, and helps young people in our area to develop. And I mean, Emily could get money off the trees that, you know, she really is amazing, but she has such commitment to making life better for people. There's actually an essay about her, and I think it's called, it's about the Uranus transit through Aries from 2011 to 2018. And I think it's called, hang on, I'll see if I can find it, because it's a really interesting piece for people to read. I've got a whole section called Planetary Ingresses, Transits and Progressions. And here we have transit, Uranus through Aries, Fire and Fury, page 283. And it's really an inspiring read, because it shows you what one individual with a commitment and a willingness to engage with community and not let their ego run away with them, which she certainly can actually do. And her motto is, start where you are, do what you can, use what you have, and just get on with it. So when I feel dismal about the state of the world, because, you know, one of the things I talk to about with my family and friends is the many rabbit holes of despair we could fall into on any given moment in any given day at present. We've got to keep ourselves back from that, and we've got to do what we can to use our little chip of brightness and light to improve the world in any small way we can.
Absolutely.
And I don't know what you think about that approach. Maybe you think it's a bit too naive, but that's the way I approach life.
Change starts on an individual level. You can't expect change if you're not prepared to do the work yourself.
I know.
Yeah. So no, and I think more than anything right now, we all need to really take a good hard look at ourselves. I think that there's a lot of, corruption going on in very high places. There's a lot of really interesting transits coming up, like Pluto entering Aquarius. We've got the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus.
Yep.
We've got so much going on. We've still got Neptune cruising through Pisces, and he's going to be there for a little while still. You know, there's just such a huge amount of bigger stuff, the bigger cycles occurring, and you know, that's all of the stuff that's instrumental to kind of the mess, I think, that is occurring down here.
Well, yes. And I've got a long essay that concludes the book, actually. It's called PS Windows to the Future. It was published in the Mountain Astrologer. I think it was in the beginning of 2020. I can't quite remember. Linking the horoscopes of Mary Shelley, who was a great predictor of the future through her book Frankenstein, because what she was saying was, look, if we don't temper scientific advance and development with compassion and humility, we are heading for a very bad place.
Yes.
And she was a prophet. That book was published in 1818, and she wrote it and finished it on her first nodal return when she was still only 19. That's what
only 19.
That's what triggered my nodal obsession, my Mary Shelley obsession, because I've got a whole chapter about my Mary Shelley obsession, which refuses to go away. But anyway, there's a fantastic link between Mary Shelley's horoscope and another young woman, Greta Thunberg's horoscope, because it's as though Mary Shelley threw the baton and Greta put her hand up and caught it and has taken it forward for the next generation, saying, this is the end result of what she was talking about. And, you know, in very broad brush stroke terms, we need to do something about this. So I have written a long piece about these big cycles. And what it amounts to is that, I mean, this is very, very general, but the Jupiter-Saturn 20-year conjunctions, which cycle through, are seen as being the kind of markers for the unfolding and development of society, for economics and so on. They're really significant. And these conjunctions had been cycling through Earth from about 1803 and concluded in 2020 on the winter solstice. Who chose that date? The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction fell at 0 degrees of Aquarius on the winter solstice of 2020, and that marked, there was a dip in it. There was a dip into the air element in the 1980s with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. That was like a sort of foretaste, a little warning. But we've had 200 years of these this cycle going through Earth, which has roughly speaking covered the rise and peaking of the Industrial Revolution. And we're moving into a radically new era, and the turbulence we're living through is reflected so clearly in the shifting of the big cycles, because apart from the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction moving into Aquarius, we've also got, as you pointed out, Pluto moving into Aquarius, and then we've got Neptune moving into Aries in a couple of years. So we've got the big heavy outer planets moving from earth and water to fire and air. So, I mean, we are, you know, we're looking at the world going through all these difficulties, and it's the balance between order and chaos dominates the whole of existence, really. And we go through periods where we have relative order, because I suppose the period from just after the Second World War, when everyone was exhausted and devastated by fighting and conflict, was a period where nations were able to cooperate more than they usually do and set up various like the United Nations and so on. But we're now plunging into a period of chaos, and that's the way it's always been. And we'll emerge from that into a new era, and hopefully there will be a lot of things that will be better. There will be things that we'll have the same old balance of shadow and light to contend with. But I feel very optimistic about the fact that people are talking so much about community, that young people like yourself and your generation aren't nearly as materialistic as the generations before. I have a wonderful nephew called Daniel, who is 29 and a community activist, who is very bright, but he has a very good heart, which is, I think it's more important to have a good heart as a human being than anything else, actually. We need good-hearted people at this time in our unfolding. And I feel optimistic about your generation of folks, that you will commit yourselves to a more community-oriented and more constructive world. I hope that's my hope for the future.
I really hope so too, and very conscious, like ecologically conscious as well, you know, not just about you know, the hierarchy and how things are being organized and ruled, but also how we are interacting with our environment in a conscious and sustainable way, because it can't carry on. So, you know, I think actually is probably quite a nice place to kind of wrap it up, because it's been such an interesting conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And Anne, we've never actually met each other before, have we? Though I do remember being at a conference in Covent Garden for the ASC conference quite a few years ago.
Yep.
And I remember hearing your voice and not knowing it was you, but thinking, who's that? Like, you were like coming up with all these things. And then afterwards, I was talking to a friend of mine, Fernanda, and she said,
Fernanda.
she mentioned you, and I was like, that was Anne Whitaker.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow. And I felt a bit upset that I hadn't actually got to meet you in person. I mean, I actually think you may have bought a book from me, or like we may have had a little conversation.
Yes.
But you know, it was not like we actually met, and I didn't really, you know, gauge, you know, the situation until it was gone. So funnily, that your Leo in the 12th house to me was a voice, a knowledgeable voice coming from somewhere in the room, and I wasn't quite sure where to place it. That's my first connection with you in person.
Stephanie, that's such a lovely thing to say. I really appreciate that. And just very, very briefly, I came to that student conference, I think it was 2012, and I had just emerged from a long, long, long immersion in the 12th house, because I had Neptune in the 6th house opposite all my Leo planets for nearly 10 years. And at the beginning of it, in the end of 2001, basically I collapsed with burnout. I'd been studying at the Center for Psychological Astrology. I'd started working. Liz had invited me to be a tutor. And I was traveling up and down to London, but we had a huge family crisis. A family member had to come home and be looked after. And it was the beginning of my menopause, so it was a perfect storm. Literally, my energy just collapsed. And it took me 7 years to recover fully.
Wow.
And that conference was my first venture out from behind the sofa since 2001.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you left an impression.
I certainly did. Well, you've made my day by saying, I mean, it's been lovely having this conversation. I've just loved it. And I've loved seeing the correspondences between us and hearing all the bright things you have to say. But that's been a delightful thing for you to share with me. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And I have a lot of listeners who are also going to thoroughly enjoy listening to this conversation, and are going to want to check you out. So where can they find you?
Okay, now there is, I think behind the sofa, Glasgow, maybe isn't exactly the most specific address I could give.
Bring tea.
Bring tea. Shall I put my details in the chat box? Would that be helpful?
I tell you what, you can share your details and I will put it in the bio. But you write or have written, I don't know if you're still active on your blogs, but writing from the 12th house.
That's it. I have 2 Facebook pages, and one of them is called Astrology Questions and Answers, which really is current. I put up all sorts of interesting stuff that I find from other astrologers, as well as things of my own. My ordinary Facebook page has all sorts on it. It's got just a bit of everything. I really would recommend it. It's a fun page, though, I say so myself. So you can find me there, and anyone who wants to write to me or email me to ask me about my upcoming books or anything like that, this is my main email address. In fact, I'll just put this. Yeah, I'll give you this one. Yeah,
that's fine. And Anne's book, I'll just hold it up so you can see.
Postcards to the Future. I'll write
Postcards to the Future. And this is the book that we've been referring to throughout the conversation, which honestly is one of those Moorish kind of books. You just think, just one more. I'll just read one more.
And I'm going to put up the title for Stephen Forrest's book as well, because it's a selection of essays, and it really is worth acquiring, because the feedback I've had about my book that pleases me the most is that beginners and practitioners alike can get quite a lot out of it, because it's accessibly written, but there's quite a lot of depth in it as well. So
it's that gift of the Mercury you've got there, isn't it?
I'll put Stephen's book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And while you do that, I will just mention that anybody who is interested in winning a Magic of Eye astrological planner, all you have to do is go to the YouTube channel and subscribe and hit the notifications bell so that you get alerts whenever a new video comes out. I do plan to be producing more videos. However, you know, if you're already subscribed to the channel, you will be put into the draw anyway. So it's absolutely fine. Subscribers new and old, if you want to be in for the astrological planner by Magic of Eye, that's all you have to do. Subscribe, hit the notifications bell. And if you have a private YouTube channel or you're not sure, just screenshot your entry and email it to Stephanie, Stefanie, at stelliumastrology.com. And Anne, it's just been such a wonderful time having a chat with you today.
I've loved it. I've loved being here.
You'll have to come back. Well, I'll pick subjects that we can explore together.
Okay,
it's going to be something we do in the future for sure. And I will be part of your next research project when you want to look at the early 20s sort of degrees in Taurus for interesting events.
Or Jupiter conjunct Uranus as well.
Yes.
We've committed ourselves now, so really we've got to stick to it.
We have to.
Okay, Steffi, thank you so much.